Boy, you think the view is good from down there? You should check it out from up here. Come on. Now, it's a little foggy today, but if I look real carefully, I can get a sighting on the Great Point Lighthouse. And that house right there, that's called Duck's Home. The original structure was built in the early 1800s, and careful viewers of the show may recall that we paid a visit to that house in the late 1980s, where we found a wonderful trestle table that we then reproduced back in the workshop. Now, the house we're at today belongs to a friend, and there's a piece that I want to show you in the master bedroom. For a long time, we've been looking for just the right piece to go next to a bed, and I think this one fits the bill. It's got plenty of room on the surface for the lamp, a phone, or maybe an alarm clock, the latest reading material, and of course, the remote control. It's just the right height. It has a nice, simple, turned leg made out of cherry. The top is 1 inch thick, and it's very simple. No breadboard edge, no miters, just a nice, smooth cut. That's important down here near the ocean. Because of the humidity, there's a lot of expansion and contraction which can cause problems. That won't happen with a simple design like this. The drawer front has actually had a piece of tiger maple laminated onto the cherry. The front is joined to the side with hand-cut dovetails. There's also dovetails at the back. The box is all solid wood, either basswood or poplar. I like this piece because it's just the right size, it's simple, yet it's elegant. I think I'll take a few measurements. Well, here it is, our version of that antique nightstand. It's a faithful reproduction of the original, made out of solid cherry. It has the turned leg. The drawer front is made out of tiger maple, except instead of using a piece of veneer on top of cherry, I used a solid piece of tiger maple. The box is made out of poplar. It's dovetailed at the front as well as at the back. Now, the top of the nightstand is a glue-up of 4 boards, solid cherry. I want to start by turning the legs. And we'll do that today on a new lathe that just arrived at the workshop. But before I can turn any legs, I need some blanks. So I went to my hardwood supplier, picked up some solid cherry, and this is referred to as 12-quarter. It's industry language, and what it means is that it's 12 quarters thick, 12 quarters of an inch, 3 inches total. Now, there are some defects in this piece, and I'll cut around those. But my goal is to get pieces that are 2 1/4 inches square, a little larger than what I'll need in the end. But before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. When I cut these pieces on the table saw, I deliberately set the fence 1/4 inch strong. And I'll show you the reason for that. If I put this piece on my joiner bed, which is absolutely flat, you can see that on this side, there's a gap in the middle. On this side, it's pretty straight. On this side, it's down in the middle. It's rocking at each end. And on this side, one end seems to be a bit short. I want these perfectly flat. What I'll do first is run the piece through my joiner to flatten one surface. See how nice and flat that is? Perfect to the table. Now what I want to do is take that jointed surface, put it up against my fence, which is square to the table, and run the next side through. That'll do 2 things. It'll flatten the next side, and it'll give me a square corner. Now I can turn to my surface planer to square up the piece. But before I run it through, I'm going to put a witness mark on the surfaces that I just trued at the joiner. I want to make sure I keep those faces down on the bed of the surface planer as I run the pieces through. At this point, I could take these blanks and go directly to the lathe. The next step is actually optional. I like to take a few minutes now to remove some material along the turning. What I basically want to do is knock off the corners, and that will save me time at the lathe. So I use the bandsaw. Quick cut with a handsaw cleans it up. Our new lathe has a lot of nice features. It's a heavy machine with a heavy bed. That means it's not going to move around as I do my turning. The bed is perfectly flat and smooth, so it's easy to move the tool rest along it. It has centers from which we drive the wood. On this end, it's a live center. It has a cup. It holds the wood, and inside there's a ball bearing, which allows the center to spin as the wood spins. On the other end, there's a drive center. And when I put this into the blank of wood, you always want to remove it from the tool, put it over the centering mark, and drive it in place with a soft mallet. You don't want to damage the drive center. Now, you slip it back into the machine, bring the tailstock forward till it's close, lock it in place, and then we crank that cup center right into the center of the blank. Make sure that it's seated. Now, when we start the turning, I want to round this section, and I want to do that at a slow speed. This lathe has some new high-tech variable speed controls. So I'll turn it on and set the speed between 500 and 700 RPMs and give it a try. Okay, that's pretty good. Now I want to move the tool rest into position, make sure that the blank is not going to hit it when it spins, and I want it parallel to the stock. Lock it down, and I'm going to start to shape the piece by making it round using this gouge. With the piece roughly turned, I can now start fine-tuning it. And for a guide, I'm going to use this template. Took a piece of 1/4-inch plywood and laid out the leg. It's square from this point to here, curves in slightly. The turning starts, there's a cove, goes straight, sort of a half cove, a bead, and then it's tapered the rest of the way. I've noted how far down from the top each of these transitions are at. Now I'll take a steel rule, mark each transition point, turn the lathe on very slowly, and make the line all the way around. Now I'm starting to do some of the final turning. I've taken this parting tool and made a cut. I want to get the diameter just right. On my template, I want 1 1/4 inches. I've set the calipers to 1 1/4 inches, and I'll keep testing the cut until they just slip by. And actually, right where I am now is fine. I'll begin the taper next. I'm going to switch from the parting tool back to the gouge to make that taper. Okay, now I want to go back to the top of the leg and I want to make this little curve piece, finish this round, and then do the cove. I'll start knocking off these corners with my skew chisel. Finally, a little sanding with some 180 grit sandpaper. And the last step that I like to do is to just gather a handful of the sawdust and hold it on the piece. It actually burnishes the wood a bit and cleans it up. And that should do it. That's good. 3 more to go. The side, back, and front rails of our nightstand are connected to the leg with mortise and tenon joinery. I like to make the mortises in the legs first and then fit the tenons to the mortises. For the last few minutes, I've been starting to set up to form tenons in the rails to fit into those mortises. I've installed this stop block so that the distance to the far side of the blade will be 3/4 of an inch, the length of the tenon. I've raised the blade to 3/16 of an inch, and that will allow me to make the shoulder cuts on these 3/4 inch thick pieces of stock for the side and back rails. The shoulder cut is where this rail will meet the leg. Now I'm going to raise the blade to 5/16 of an inch and make the shoulder cuts on the front rails. Now I've raised the blade to 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to nibble away the edge of all the tenons. The final step in forming the tenons is to make these cheek cuts. And the only safe way to make those is with a tenoning jig. It slides in the miter slot of the table saw. It has a clamp built into it so that it holds these narrow pieces securely as I push them through the saw blade. I removed the top from the prototype so I can show you the inner works. This cleat, which is actually made out of a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, will be used to keep the drawer from tipping out as it's opened and a way to secure the top. It sits in a groove in the side rails. With the dado still installed and the addition of this sacrificial fence, I'm able to form a tongue on the pieces of plywood which will fit into the groove that I machined. The lower cleats, which are also made out of 3/4 inch thick plywood, will support the drawer. They're attached to the back rail and the front rail with biscuits. I need to cut those slots next. That little notch will allow the cleat to fit around the leg. Well, finally, we're ready for some assembly. I've put some glue in the mortise and on the tenon. I'm going to slip the back rail in first and then clamp up that pair of legs. Okay, now I can slip the front rails into the legs and clamp those up as a pair. Okay, now I can slide the side rails and those cleats to support the drawer in place. Now the trick is to take this assembly, stand it up upside down, and try to slide the front pair of legs into place, connecting everything, and then clamping it. Okay, set this aside to dry. Now for the top. Here are some 1-inch thick boards, which will make the top the same thickness as the original. I'm going to joint these edges so they're nice and tight. Then I'll glue them together, no biscuits, and let it cook overnight. That ought to do it. We'll easily finish this project tomorrow. Oh, good morning. Last night, all the joints on the base of our nightstand dried. I've removed the clamps, and now I'm adding a couple more pieces. This little strip of hardwood is going to sit on top of the drawer support, right along the edge. And what that does is it guides the side of the drawer. A little bit of glue and brads will hold it in place. Then there's one more piece here that goes at the top. This will guide the top of the drawer as well as give me a place to secure the top. Now while that dries, let's make a drawer. The first joint on the drawer that I want to work on is the connection between the side and the front. And this is known as a half-blind dovetail. I want to cut these tails in the side pieces first using my dovetailing jig. Now I've organized the drawer front on top of the jig, flipped the fingers over, and that'll allow me to cut the sockets for the tails. The side of the drawer is joined to the back with through dovetails. And I have a sample here so I can show you that joint. The side gets the tails, the back gets the pins. When they're slipped together, you have a very strong joint. In this case, it's really more of a decorative element for our drawer. I've installed one of the sides in the jig with the inside facing out, and I'll cut those tails first. Now I've installed the back of the drawer in the jig, flipped the fingers around, and installed a straight cutting bit in the router to cut the pins. All 4 pieces of the drawer get this groove for the plywood bottom. With these strong dovetail joints, the only thing necessary to hold it together is glue, no mechanical fasteners. Well, let's set this aside and go to work on the top. After cutting the top to size, now it's just a matter of starting with coarse grit sandpaper and working down to 220 grit to give me the finish I want. For this piece, we're going to have a two-tone stain job. For the tiger maple draw front, I'm applying a gel stain. I'll put on a liberal amount, let it set for 3 minutes, and then wipe off the excess. Well, it's been about 3 minutes, so now I can wipe off the excess, and boy, it really brings out the highlights of that tiger maple. We'll let this set overnight before we do anything else to it. You'll notice that there's a lot of color variation in the boards that I've picked for the top. I could put a clear finish on it, and cherry does darken with age, but it takes a long time. So what I've decided to do is take a dark, deep penetrating stain and put on a nice heavy coat. That'll blend all the variations of color together. We'll let this dry overnight. For a protective coat on our nightstand, I'm applying a fast-drying gloss polyurethane. 2 coats should do it, with a light sanding in between. Boy, the polyurethane's not even dry yet, and we already have a use for this project. It's going to be on display in a This Old House bedroom. I sure hope they like it. Nice dark stain on the cherry, the tiger maple front, the brass hardware, and a gloss finish.